Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Andrew Smith, Client Manager at Amplify Solutions, and thank you for joining us. It's great to have you all here this morning for our Tech Founders Roundtable on building success through revenue. And thank you to Raise Ventures as well for working with us in today's event. I'm delighted to say that we have Jenny Irvine, co-founder of Raise, here with us today as well. So welcome, Jenny.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining today. Looking forward to hearing some great tips in terms of building sales and revenue through what's certainly been a challenging time.
Also, as you can see, we have a great panel for you all to hear from. We have Philip McAleese, co-founder and CEO of See.Sense, Terry Canning, CEO of CattleEye, and Daniel McGlade, founder and CEO of Oroson. But before we get into the discussion, I'm going to let each of our panelists give an introduction of their own, just about them and a bit about their company. So Philip, you're very welcome.
Good morning, I'm Philip McAleese, CEO and co-founder at See.Sense. We make these. It looks like a regular bike light, but it's crammed with patented communication and sensor technology. And that lets it do two very important things. First of all, for you as a cyclist, it's reacting to the environment around you and will flash brighter and faster at high risk situations like road junctions, roundabouts, filtering in traffic, and so on. And so those individual consumers are our end customers that we'll talk a little bit about today. But also it allows us to collect data if you opt into data collection to understand your journey and how you travel around the city. And we sell that data back to our city partners to allow them to plan for better infrastructure. And again, we can touch a little bit on that as to how we got those customers and how we manage and retain them as well.
And Terry, I'll let you intro yourself.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So my name's Terry Canning and I am CEO and co-founder of CattleEye. CattleEye is an autonomous monitoring system that uses video analytics powered by deep learning to monitor dairy cows. So we can monitor using just a normal 2D security camera uploaded to the cloud with lots and lots of very clever artificial intelligence to work out how well the animal is being kept and how if there's any issues with it, we can highlight it to the farmers. So we're still in early stages. We're in the middle of a raise for about 2 million, and we're being piloted by the Tesco Sustainable Dairy Group in GB. We're getting our first revenue. We're also got some pilots running in the US. So I'll be able to talk a little bit about that, plus my experience with my previous business, which was Farm Wizard, which I founded back in 2004, and I sold in 2015, which was also in the livestock sector, but very much software as a service for managing livestock. So I can talk a little bit about the journey, how we started, how we got that one first of all off the ground, sold and exited, and how I've been able to leverage that as we built up the second one, and the lessons that I've learned from both of those.
Thanks, Terry. And last but no means least, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Daniel McGlade, founder and chief exec of Oroson. So Oroson is a platform designed to make it easier for teams to share and review content, both internally, but also specifically externally with clients with a particular focus on the creative marketing industries. We already work with agencies across the UK and Europe, along with some larger media companies and also some local companies as well, like Amplify, which is great. On the call today, I can talk about a few things. One, our own experience of working both with SMEs and larger enterprise customers. I have had the joyous experience of going through a pretty substantial pivot in the lifetime of the business as well. And during that pivot, we have gone from working with some of the largest financial institutions in the world through to now working across the agency market, and so have all the battle scars that go along with that, and hopefully can add something to the conversation today.
Thanks very much, Daniel. So, look, obviously a key part of building success or a successful business is developing an effectively functioning sales process. So we know this can be difficult at the best of times, but with the working world and life in general abruptly disrupted around this time last year, businesses were obviously facing challenges like never before, with many seeing their sales processes greatly impacted. For experienced established businesses, this was throwing up enough problems, but for startups and scale-ups, these were amplified. So This morning, we're going to have a chat just amongst us. We're going to try and understand a bit more about, as you've all said there, the early days, how you identify maybe your key market, how you built your sales process, and then in this past year, how you overcame the challenges of selling in this increasingly online world. So at the end of the session, we are going to put some questions that the audience will have hopefully sent in. We'll put some to you. So for the audience at this stage, if you do have any questions you'd like to ask, or as you go through the conversation here, think of anything, please do put it into the Q&A box and we'll select some at the end. But at this stage, I suppose we'll get started. So I suppose a good place to start would be, Philip, if you could talk us through your sales process and how it evolved over the first couple of years in your trading.
Sure. So I'll talk, I guess, a bit more about our B2B sales process. The marketing to consumer is obviously done through primarily through social channels and brand building, and that's, I guess, a little bit different from what most people will be interested in. In terms of our B2B in the early days, we realized that we didn't come from a cycling background. I was an IT director in investment banking. My wife and co-founder was a management consultant doing organizational change programs. And so for us to access those senior folks that we needed to get to in the cycling, transport planning, and I guess local authority areas was very, very difficult. We didn't have the connections, we didn't have those inroads. So I guess, my advice would be, if you've got connections, you use them. And if somebody offers you an intro to someone, make sure you take them up and make sure you follow through and give them feedback and encourage them to do that again. For us, it was really about, in those early days, going to events. So going to trade shows and places where we would have the opportunity to meet these people, researching in advance and making sure that we knew who was presenting on stage, and then, typically trying to grab them as they came off stage and saying, I really liked your talk. It was really interesting because of X, Y, and Z. And did you know we do A, B, and C? Would you like to know more? So, as I'm sure Jenny will attest to, you don't get a lot of opportunities to do that. And so your pitch needs to be really succinct, really short, really punchy, and get straight to the point. If you start into the whole founder story of, as soon as you say, my name's Philip McAleese, and back in 2013, I was a cyclist in blah, 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 they'll just switch off. They don't have time for that. So it's about, getting everything across, your value proposition in 1 or 2 sentences. And that really served us very well for the first couple of years. It allows us to get that foothold in the door and that initial exposure to our customers. We then spent a lot of time really doing really trying to get lighthouse customers. So, agreeing to work with people and saying, look, we'll discount this work, or we'll do additional work for you if you agree to allow us to put out, marketing material and a success story based around this. And that was not without challenge, because we were in an industry where, we were getting these amazing insights about how people were cycling around the city. The local authority didn't generally have the funding or the drive to be able to really make significant changes. And so the danger was that we would present, here's the top 10, worst roads in the county. And they didn't want to publish that, because obviously it wouldn't be good PR for them, because the next question would be, okay, that's great. So what's the local authority doing about it? So it was a very rocky and twisting road as we got those initial customers and found things that, they were willing for us to be able to talk about, to get our name out there and to I guess, move forward and build on those to get increasingly bigger and bigger clients. Obviously with COVID, things changed. The conferences weren't happening, people weren't traveling, and indeed all of the cycling commuters that were cycling to and from work, collecting data from us, stopped cycling or decided to cycle for leisure and weren't going the places we thought. So, not only were our customers pausing active projects, anything that was in the sales pipeline, became very glacial as people weren't willing to ask their employees to go out and cycle and commute. So that presented a whole new raft of challenge. So we had to think about, what do we do to do that? So partly it was product. We pivoted into fleet trackers so that we're now getting involved in scooters, and you should see a relatively big announcement from us soon about a scooter program that we're engaging in, focusing on safety for the scooter trials that are happening around GB at the moment. And we also started pivoting into then being able to track city bikes, because these were transport that was still in use and still very much moving around the city. So that allowed us to keep the product relevant and keep those sales going. And then in order to access those people that we were meeting at conferences and catching up with, we obviously went to a lot of the online conferences. That was challenging in itself because a lot of the conference software we think is not that great. It doesn't allow a lot of opportunity for networking and social interaction and really engaging with people. And even when it does, people find it a little bit awkward. They don't know how it works or what it looks like or how should they be engaging. And so I've seen it work a little bit better with American audiences, with American conferences where, they are happy to stand up and talk about themselves. In GB, I guess we're a little bit more, or in UK, we're a little bit more reserved and perhaps doesn't work quite so well for us. So what we found was really good was we actually approached one of the conference companies and we said, can we run a conference? So we want to focus specifically on a topic which we think will be interesting to a lot of your customer base. And they'd moved all of their conferences online. And so the idea was we'll sponsor it and, we'll have VIP tickets that we can give away. You can charge for entrance, so you can make some money on it as well, of course. And we'll bring along lots of really interesting speakers from industry, from academia. We'll bring the researchers and the people doing the work together. We'll discuss this topic. We'll have some good panel sessions, some individual speakers. And so we curated that and put it together. And it worked incredibly well. We got, hundreds of people in the audience. We got dozens of sales leads. And it worked beautifully. It allowed us to, explore our capability and technology to control that narrative and effectively to be a really effective sales pitch without coming across as too salesy. It was quite informative and really brought people along. So that was most definitely our greatest success in kind of COVID times so far.
Yeah, and that's really interesting point, obviously, in terms of the connections. I think that's something which, as a youngster, maybe I didn't really appreciate as much. But when you started to get older and into the working world, even from university, people just said, make connections with people, speak to as many people and work as you can. And I just thought that just seems a bit weird speaking to these people. But in hindsight, it's like, oh no, that's actually one of the most important things. And Terry, I know as you touched upon, CattleEye it's just over 2 years old now. It's really starting to get up into stride. But from the same perspective for yourself in terms of your sales process in the early days, I'm sure, as you mentioned about Farm Wizard, you might want to touch upon that, and maybe as well some of the learnings that you've taken actually between the two processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start first with CattleEye because it was just so much easier. Having done it before and built a successful business, exited, it was easier to get people to trust you. It was easier to build a team. So I was able to build a really strong, technically proficient team that had used this type of technology in the human healthcare sector. So I was really able to build a strong team. And then when you've that much firepower behind you, credibility behind you, then things become much easier. And so with our first, if you like, customer traction was with Tesco, who are obviously the largest grocery retailer. So it was much easier, and even the tech itself attracted a lot of people. So people just wanted to, gosh, this sounds amazing. You can use a camera to monitor a dairy cow, and we all want to be part of that. So even being able to find pilot customers in the UK and the US was relatively easy. But when I look back to my Farm Wizard days, and it was an app that was used for livestock management, it wouldn't have been the deep tech of CattleEye. So we were starting from the start. I was from the industry, but I'd spent 9 years just working in various telecoms companies when I came up with the idea for Farm Wizard. And really the first sort of 6 months sitting developing in my attic. And then we went to, I think it was DERA in Northern Ireland, the agricultural group, and they got quite excited by it, and we got a little bit of grant funding. And then at that stage, I was able to get a really brilliant business development manager on board, a guy called Mark Elliott, who was from the industry. And then we had to do the hard yards, which was going to each farm. So at the start, it was very much farm to farm. It was very much relationship based. Would have been difficult now in COVID days to have maybe got that going. But Mark was really strong at being able to build relationships. We got farmers bought into the story, and we built up from there. And then from selling direct to farmers, we then moved up a tier into the resellers. So we then started to, into the multiples. The other guys that were on the farm who were selling other types of products became very interested in our technology. But it wasn't until we had done the groundwork of getting the farmers and the good use cases and the lighthouse customers were able to get the next level, which were the farm input providers, the big businesses, which eventually led to the acquisition. And even this time around, whenever I reflect on with CattleEye, initially my thought was, yeah, let's just start with the resellers and because of my reputation and the team that we could get something going, and they're all very engaged. But it wasn't until we got the farmer, the actual end users, excited and up and running, then they came on board after that. So it's kind of, you got to get your end users, your customers, those use cases. And although the cost of customer acquisition could be very high at the start, whenever you're going to visit farms, and in our case it was farms, obviously, but you need that there to give you the first step on the ladder to be able to start moving up afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear from that story, Terry, even from both from Farm Wizard as well as CattleEye, in terms of just the hard yards really have to be put in. It's not necessarily you can get lucky by targeting one big customer. And work down, it's very much from the groundwork, literally, as well.
Exactly. And I think just to reflect as well on some of what Philip says about COVID, I mean, in many ways, it's COVID has been good in general for the tech industry. It's accelerated the digitization, other than a few key industries like hospitality that have suffered. In general, there's been an advance in digitizations, which I think as tech companies we all benefit from. And we see it from even the conferences. Like I remember this time last year, I'd been due to go to San Francisco for a conference, and we were getting a really good coverage at it, and it was cancelled. But we still got all the meetings. They're all done remotely. And that's what I've found in the conferences since then. They've been very, very efficient. The fact that you don't have to travel and be there. So I think conferences, there will be an online conference. I have no doubt about it. An option. There'll be guys that are fantastic at running online conferences. Well, they'll just keep going because they're fantastically efficient at meeting people. Now you miss the chance meeting, so they're not just as good. But if you sort of reflect cost benefit, they're pretty strong and well up there.
Daniel, then, I mean, I remember years ago we actually met first over lunch through previous employment, and this is when Oroson was really, just getting going and had it. I think you were just closing your initial funding as well at that stage. So you told me quite a lot all those years ago, and suppose share that with the audience in terms of what your sales process was then, or what your approach was, and maybe how that changed as well over the first few years.
Yeah. In the first couple of years, it's chaotic, because it's very difficult to understand at that stage really what drives your customer. Like, that's the key advice I would give to anybody who's starting a business, is to try and meet with as many of your ideal customers as possible to get a real understanding of exactly what drives them, what the problem is, what the actual problem is, not what you perceive the problem to be, because that can be two different things. And if you start off on the wrong track, then it can be an expensive mistake to make. We are constantly trying to refine our understanding of our ideal customer profile. So we used this past year with COVID and what was going on to almost even refine that process even further. So back in May last year, we kicked off a process whereby we knew that a lot of people were working more remotely, and they were working remotely from home. So it meant that it was an opportunity, because people were, we've actually found people are more willing to take meetings and calls, because if nobody else to speak to, people are generally a bit isolated, so they're quite happy to jump on a call. So over the course of the past year, I looked at the numbers yesterday, we've done over 550 calls with people that fit that ideal customer profile. And the purpose of those calls, some of them have been sales calls, and that's great, but the majority of them have been more around almost a research piece to allow us to really understand exactly how people solve the problems that we're trying to solve at the moment or not, and what drives them. Because if you have a really in-depth understanding of your ideal customer profile, that really is what moves you from kind of whenever you're first getting started and scrambling to try and work out how you get your first customer. Like, I can remember when we had our first customer, it was a scramble to think, okay, how do I get my next customer? Like, you have no idea how you repeat that process. But actually what you want to get is, once you have a real in-depth understanding, you can then look at repeatable ways to get to that audience, and actually then it starts to become a much easier process. And that's something I'd really advise anybody to focus upon. That's what we've really begun to focus upon, is having that repeatable process where you have a really in-depth understanding of your ideal customer profile. And actually, as many people kind of have heard before, it's as important to understand what doesn't work and who isn't your ideal customer profile. Like in the early days, you start out and you think the world's your oyster, everybody's a prospect, let's sell as much as we can. But actually that can be counter-effective to what you're trying to achieve, because it can spread your attention and your focus too far, which then means, particularly when it comes to building a product and a SaaS product, where you need that focus to make sure that it's delivering value and you don't have a limited resource or funds behind you. Having a really specific ICP and real specific focus is incredibly important. And we went through that entire process. We kind of had a much more general product initially that was kind of a collaboration tool generally for teams. And then we started to realize, looking at how people were sharing the product and the most active users, well, the people that share the most and have to get that feedback as the large proportion of their daily routine are people within agency and creative environments where they're sharing a lot of content, having to get a lot of feedback. So we immediately focused upon that and then started to grow from there. And actually that was one of the best decisions we've made, because it's allowed us to really bring focus to the product and not get distracted where we could otherwise have fallen down a pretty big hole.
Very good. Very interesting, yeah.
We were, working with our startups in the early stage and looking at that commercialization piece. They quite often, they get their first 1 to 5 to 10 customers, and then they look for, investment. But then the next piece of the puzzle then is how do they grow their team? It'd be really interesting to find out, what's that moment that when you make your first sales hire, because quite often it's the founder doing the sales process, but then you need to grow and scale and delegate, 50 to 90% of that. And then maybe the founder comes in and closes the last 10%, and then over a period of time it moves down into the sales team. So Philip, do you have any kind of hints on when or how to make your first sales hire?
Yeah, so for us, our first hire was a sales guy. Our second hire was a designer, and our third hire was a techie. So we went sales mad first. Now, we initially targeted the wrong customers. So we thought about, in the early days, of building the brand, we thought the best way was to go to retailers. And so we spent a lot of effort, a lot of energy in getting a sales guy, getting him on the road, getting him travel around, building the relationships, and getting those initial sales into those retailers. We should have gone direct, so we didn't quite get the channel mix right initially, but yeah, we felt it was super important. We always had aspirations to be a big company and to grow sales as quickly as possible, and so sales has always been kind of at the focus and the forefront of what we do. So yeah, my first hire was a sales guy.
Very good. And Terry, 2 years into a new company, again, same question, when do you make your first sales hire?
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that, because we're making that right now. In terms of the initial traction and engagement, I've been leading that, and that's with a lot of the retailers and setting up the pilot farms. And now things are starting to move. We're looking to, we're in the process of recruiting a commercial director. And I think it's taken, maybe it's whenever there's product market fit, whenever you feel that's happened, that's maybe the right stage to do it. When I think back on my Farm Wizard days, I think it was after we had got the support from the Northern Ireland Ag department, where they had given us some grant, and maybe got 1 or 2 on myself, then that Mark came along. And then really expanded that whole farmer base out. So it's a very important early hire, but it's one you have to be careful of. I mean, I've had very bad experiences later on down the line with Farm Wizard, for example, where we recruited a commercial director, very expensive one, under pressure from the board, and it didn't work out so well. And it wasn't really their fault. It was probably the market. The product wasn't right for that particular market or anything like that. But it's one you have to be careful, because a lot of really good salespeople, especially experienced people, like they want big sort of 4-figure salaries. Like that's kind of as a basic. So you have to be careful as well, and make sure the timing's right, and you have and you have to be ready to get rid of somebody very quickly if you have to. But it is a very key hire and a very important one.
Daniel, you're very much in the marketing and sales arena, so kind of marketing and sales is key to your business. What do you think about the first sales hire?
Yeah, I have some battle scars around this as well. So So Oroson, originally, whenever Oroson was first started, Oroson started 6.5 years ago and then pivoted about 2 years ago. And originally Oroson was an EdTech product, so it was a product for universities, and we built quite a mature product for universities. Thought we were going the right way. Had 7 or 8 universities on board and almost 10,000 students, and then realized there's not much money in higher education, but at the same time discovered that we built something that there was an appetite for within the business market. Throughout that process and throughout that pivot, I kind of learned a lesson that's kind of fallen onto today. We took on a salesperson too early in that initial piece. It is so important, at least I believe it's so important, that the founder takes on as much of that initial sales piece to get to that product market fit, because you're the driver behind the business. Whenever you get to your initial customers, your customers, they're only like partly buying the product, they're buying you, you're buying the story, what you're like. If it's somebody else that doesn't have the same impact, it also means that if you're not at the cold face, you don't really understand where you're at. Like a salesperson is great at selling your product, but they're also great at selling a story as well. And you don't need a story, you need brutal honesty to really understand where you're at. It also, from my experience, is really unfair on the salesperson if you hire a salesperson too early in the journey, and I've been through that pain, because a salesperson and salespeople generally, I don't know if anybody are watching, so I hope no one take offense, but they're incredibly driven, and they are all about closing the sale. They're kind of, as a good salesperson I know once described themselves, like a rabid dog constantly chasing the sale. But they have to make sure they're chasing the right thing, and that responsibility is on you. If you set them up where you don't have that product market fit and they're chasing something and it's never going to close, and it's not their fault as hard as they try, you're almost setting up kind of more friction and more confrontation within the company, because they're never going to succeed. So it puts a real emphasis on the company and the founder to make sure you're setting up the right platform for your salesperson to succeed. Now, we're at the other end of that now. Funny enough, we're actually bringing on are in the process of kind of bringing on additional sales resource at the moment, but that's only because we're at a stage now where we have that product market fit, where we have a kind of a real understanding of our ICP, what the value points are. And at this stage, it is incredibly important that we bring that person on board, because actually where a founder's skills are really good in terms of selling the initial story and everything, once you get product market fit, you don't want that anymore, okay? Because you don't want to be trying to sell the story to thousands of customers. Actually, quite the opposite. You need that removed, and you need it to be very cold and down the middle. And actually, a salesperson can be much harder. And part of the problem as to why we discovered this, why you're maybe not closing those sales that you need, is that you're almost like a typical startup founder will, in trying to sell the story, etc., there's almost like they undersell the product. Often you'll see that people underprice their product as a result. Whereas a hard salesperson will come in, the most confident person in the room, multiply the price of the product by 10, it will be, they're doing a really good job, but actually there's friction there, and good positive friction, because that business needs to change, and we're going through that in a minute. So it is an incredibly important hire to bring on board, but only when the company is ready. Otherwise, you just set yourself up for more pain.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that as well. I mean, Irene and I, my co-founder, both still front all of the big sales. We are the salesperson that goes in with the passion, the understanding of the technology, the understanding of the stories, the backup of all the founder information if we need it. And I'm not naturally a salesperson. It's a skill that I've had to learn. I think it's probably a gap in a lot of startups as well. A lot are led by very good, product people or engineers who have seen a gap in the market and said, I know how to fix that. So for me, it was, well, I've got an electronic and software background. I'm going to design the world's best bike light and make it really good, because I was a cyclist and I was commuting in Singapore and I wasn't happy with my visibility and safety, and I wanted to solve the problem. So, I love nothing more than having a good discussion about the benefits of 2-wire interface versus single wire, and the refresh rate of accelerometers and stuff. And you can imagine how the people's eyes would glaze over. I'm absolutely the classic, turn off the lights and slide pizza under the door to keep me alive, and I'll be in my element with a giant 50-inch monitor and Darth Vader chair and developing tech. So perhaps not the most obvious salesperson, but the founder passion gives you that need to sell and to close. And I spent a lot of time actually figuring out how to sell, and going to a lot of training and workshops. And it's often the little tips that make all the difference. So it's things like at the end of the meeting, ask them, so where would you like to go from here? Can we set up a follow-up meeting for 2 weeks? Get them to get out their calendar there and then, so there's no excuse for them to get away or not reply to your email and that sort of stuff. we find that things like just giving them a bit of homework. So, you do the initial sales presentation, tell them what your stuff can do, and then basically ask them a question. So, what does that mean for how big do you think it is? Or just some piece of information that they'll have to go away and find and come back to you. And then just basically sit back and wait. If they never come back, then it's probably would have been a waste of your time to chase them. But if they come back, if they're willing to invest that little bit of effort on their side, then you've got a better qualified sales lead. And it's all those little things I would have had absolutely no idea about as a tech guy, that really makes me more effective. And I'm not a good sales guy. I'm not as good as the professionals that are out there dedicated to it. But we make up for that with founder passion and the desire to get it right, and 100 mistakes along the way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the founder story is always powerful, and Philip just gave us his there about Singapore, which I think is really, really, really powerful. So, although you may not be, or whenever you start out, that's skilled in the art of selling, and that can be improved. But a really good founder story, people connect to it, and I find people almost go back and some of the feedback I get is go back and tell them you're from a dairy farm, that you really understand it, and people like that story. So I think the founder story is important, as well as all the sales tricks as well.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right in that. There's a reason why people usually want to hear from the founders and CEOs of companies at conferences and at events like this, rather than the salespeople. Even whilst this is about the learnings and sales process, etc. So you're right. The story, that has to be there from the outset. But I suppose everyone there has touched upon it in earlier discussions around what's happened in the past 12 months. So, with a view on that, unfortunately, we are going to have to look back at it, and as much as we'd rather just look forward to what's coming. But how have you had to adapt your sales process during this time? So you all, like I say, touched upon it, but maybe you could give a bit more detail, say around types of people within either your business or externals that you had to try and engage with, if that was different. Any new systems you've had to bring in, whether it's for your marketing or sales, and even any new markets that you've maybe had to look to, which weren't initially on your plan. Daniel, if I could start with you on that.
Yeah. In some, so our experience with COVID has been, I suppose, predominantly a good one. In some respects, initially when it first hit, there was an initial lag because people just went on complete hold. Nobody knew how long it was going to last for, so nobody's making any purchasing decisions or any decisions of anything. They're just kind of holding off. But then quickly we noticed that by the time we got to the second half of the summer, that started to relax, and particularly in the new year now, things are starting to ramp up quite further again, or quite a lot. There has been a change of process. There's been some things that have been really important. So from an internal perspective, process is so we use Pipedrive as our CRM for management and everything. We probably didn't use it as well previously as we've had to use it now, given that we are completely remote and there's a real reliance upon that in terms of reporting. So detail and kind of been regimented, making sure that everybody in the team is really detailed, because you don't have, like, we were semi-remote before anyway, but even being able to meet with everybody, once a week or whatever, once every 2 weeks, just that allowed you to kind of thrust things out and be a bit more relaxed, whereas things can get lost in translation very quickly when it comes to just sending a quick message or whatever. So being very regimented in your reporting is incredibly important. Like I suppose Zoom has become the default when it comes to sales calls, so you don't have that in-person contact. So actually there's been a wee bit of just getting used to being very personable across Zoom and things that you can do to kind of improve how you come across on those calls. One of the opportunities that we've actually, one of the things that's worked for us is that we record a majority of our initial sales calls now, because that allows us to look at, rewatch it, understand, did that go well, did it not go well, can we take notes on it, can we improve the process, which is something we never would have had before. It would have been more kind of a kind of tangential kind of overall observations, but actually being able to go back and see actually how did that call really go, how did they really engage, what were the buying signals, etc., has allowed us to get a real more in-depth understanding of our process and how we can improve things from there. In terms of our customer side of things, generally across the board, we find that people are more open not only to the conversation but also adopting new technology. I actually think it's a trend that will accelerate even further this year. So one of the things we found is that in the first 6 months of COVID, there's a real adoption of not new technology in terms of new startup technology, but more new kind of enterprise level technology. So the likes of Microsoft Teams, Slack, all the big established players, as people were kind of just getting anything they could to just settle themselves into some form of remote working. Now, coming at the other end of that, it's kind of jumped people forward like 5 years in terms of their adoption of remote working and technology generally. And they're looking for more innovative ways to work. And one of the things that we've started to realize and heard on a regular basis from our calls is that people are realizing that remote working to some degree is going to exist for the foreseeable future. And the tools that were kind of used whenever you were not working remotely won't really work in the same way any longer. You know, there needs to be different processes, there needs to be more innovative ways to work, which then opens the door to new technology where there's a real opportunity. So kind of tying into that and that kind of trend is something we see as an opportunity going forward.
Yeah, I think that even that point, which is very important. You know, I'm sure not a lot of people actually think of that in terms of recording calls and things like that, just so you can learn. Because you're right, you know, if we were doing this actually in person at a proper round table, although I am sitting at a round table, so don't feel like I'm lying to people, but you know, it would be a lot more relaxed. You can tell when people are maybe going to speak or when somebody's thinking something differently, whereas on a screen, it's just awkward. And there's some people and some cultures are very good at dealing with it and are used to it, and others that aren't as well. So it's very important, like you say, to learn, take those learnings and then implement them for the next one to improve. And Terry, I suppose from your side, you know, with it being the early stages and maybe in terms of trying to start to grow the sales, but also still really scale or develop the product and going through this fundraise at the minute, you know, has the past year then has it been more difficult and put brakes on that? Has it actually helped you in a sense of where it's giving you almost space to accelerate those things?
Yeah, I think there's different aspects. I would reflect what Daniel had said about that early stages of COVID. There was a bit of a panic, and you could tell that in the investment community. I mean, we were having these calls, and I think I remember Philip was one as well, where people were finding out that funds weren't investing in new companies. They were saving all the firepower for follow-on. And then somebody said, when the FTSE recovers, then you'll see that change. And that's pretty much what happened. The FTSE started to come back up again, and then the investments started to flow. And then they started seeing investments just happen without meeting people. So I'm pretty close to closing the 2 million round. And there's not even a question of, some of it's from the US, some of it's from mainland Europe. And it's not even a question of meeting people. So before you would have had to have that meeting, I think what hasn't happened is there hasn't been the spread of capital that people expected. You know, I think there was a sort of a thought that, you know, all of a sudden this Silicon Valley money would pile out all over the world. And that hasn't happened because I think investment houses tend to have location bias. So they tend to maybe be focused on Boston, or they tend to be focused on London, you know, so that kind of that hasn't happened. So that didn't turn out what we expected, but still funds started to do deals. In terms of sales, I found it extremely efficient. In terms of, you know, getting in front of people that would have expected you to be there in person. In the old days, you know, we can do calls to US farms up, you know, we can do 10 a week. And those people would have expected you to be in front of them, some of these massive dairy farms in the US. So it's massively efficient, and the expectation of you being in front of them is no longer there. So it's a really good thing. So people don't see you disrespecting them because you're not knocking on their door. They just see, well, they can't be here, so that's fine. So I think we found that good. I mean, you always miss the personal touch. I think you know, I caveat the statement with that, but certainly efficiencies and being able to meet people very quickly all over the world from a sales perspective has been very positive for us. And I think as well, just to add, finally, is CattleEye as a remote monitoring system is replacing a person visiting a farm. So therefore it gains more traction because of COVID and people can't visit farms. So that's been a good thing for us as well.
Yeah, and absolutely to your point about actually, you know, people being more accessible. There's people where I've been able to have calls over the past, you know, 6 months, 9 months, where typically you probably wouldn't have actually been able to engage with them. Whereas when people are just sitting at their kitchen table or sitting in the office alone, they're actually going, well, I don't have to travel anywhere. I can fit half an hour into the diary and yeah, I'll have a chat and see. And quite quickly it breaks down borders and links into those networks. But again, it all goes back to your connections and being able to, or being ready and willing to look for those opportunities. And Philip, then in terms of yourself, obviously, as you said at the start, a more established sort of market a more established business as well. You know, what has your experience up until that point then? What did that stand you in good stead for the past 12 months? Or again, was it very much a learning curve like everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a learning curve like everyone else. I mean, it's, you know, making sure that we continue to sort of service the leads that we have in our pipeline and continue to migrate them down through, as well as running conferences and things to add in more at the top. I guess what we gained in terms of efficiency, in terms of being able to meet more clients, you know, having to fly backwards and forwards to GB in particular. I mean, Irene or I were typically on a plane every week or every other week to Birmingham or Manchester or London and meeting people, and, you know, incredibly inefficient when you look back at it. You know, you spend, you know, a whole day from like a red-eye flight and then getting home quite late in the evening just to meet one or maybe 2 or 3 clients if you can line them all up on the same day. And if all goes well and the planes aren't delayed. And whereas now, you know, 5-6 Zoom calls in a day, perfectly achievable. I guess where it becomes less efficient on the other side was really on the team side of things. So, you know, when we were in the office, it was very easy to discuss something and say, you know, hey, Gemma, could you look them up on social media, see what they're at, see if that's relevant for them. You know, Johnny, can you organize 100 sample lights to go out to them? And you can just put things together really, really quickly. Now, we all had laptops, and we used cloud services like Gmail and stuff for our corporate mail. We had Slack and so on. So when we went remote, we literally just all grabbed our laptops, headed for the hills, and haven't really needed to come back to the office very much since. But we missed that, you know, team interaction. How do we do that effectively? How do we have the water cooler chats? How do we get the almost people overhearing stuff to trigger other ideas and make sure that we get that creativity and that knowledge of what's going on organically spreading through the company? And so we've recently started using a tool called Notion. We were using Trello and Pipedrive to manage our kind of, you know, delivery and sales pipeline. And we found that Notion describes itself as the missing half of Slack. And actually, the more we use it, the more we tend to agree. And it's a really nice way, actually, of putting a lot of information together in a very succinct and easy way, such that everyone can look at it and interact with it. And so it's really, it's transforming our efficiency at the moment in terms of making sure that if we've got particularly things that go across different functional areas. So, you know, if you've got something that involves, you know, marketing, design, customer service, and technology, that we get all those teams involved at the right time, doing the right thing to achieve the right outcomes. Because quite often, a lot of these things, particularly if you are able to now fit, you know, 5 or 6 Zoom calls in a day, there's quite a lot of follow-up actions typically that you've got to go and do to make sure that that reaches that next stage. And so we find that Notion has been really helpful in helping us to get some of that efficiency back into the way we work.
Yeah, I find it, you know, really interesting in terms of the sales process and the new markets and the people opportunity and the efficiency. I think there's great opportunity out there for the, you know, the startups and the scale ups. And I think you all touched on it slightly already, but just in terms of that closing the sales. So, you know, how do we get them across the line in a virtual world? You mentioned already, Philip, in terms of, you know, getting it in the calendar and having a follow-up, you know, but how do you replicate the signing on the dotted line?
It is, yeah, it's very much a challenge. I mean, each client is different. We haven't really gotten to that fully repeatable, scalable model just yet. You know, each one is slightly tailored, and, you know, we spend a lot of time, you know, because it's relatively new, nobody's really seen what we've done before. We are ice breaking as we go. And so it's almost educating the clients. Quite often we find that the biggest differentiator, the biggest thing that will help it land is either, you know, it's either an internal person who's really a champion and is pulling it in from the inside, and that works really, really well. So if you can get that conversion of that person that, you know, uses our product as a cyclist, understands where we're going, gets the vision, then they'll make it happen, and that works really, really well for us. The other one that I'm sad to say drives things quite a lot is actually budgets. So you know, local authorities coming up to the end of their financial year suddenly find this pot of money that they have to spend. And what are they going to spend it on? Well, they resurfaced the car park 4 times already in the last 4 years, so they need to go for something a bit different. And, you know, we're a nice, safe, easy bet for them, and we present ourselves as such that, you know, they can spend not a huge amount of money, get some really interesting insights on how people are traveling and moving around the city, and it feeds into lots of their initiatives that are sort of emerging or will solidify in the near future, which are, active travel and improving health, and, reducing pollution and congestion, and cycling and active travel feeds into all of those. So that's helped us to land a few deals as well.
The champion piece is really important. And I guess, Terry, with your expertise, and as you said, being a dairy farmer background, you mentioned earlier the big American dairy farms. Is that, using those relationships to get them across the line?
Yeah, well, it was because we started working with a product director, a part-time consultant who had those in place already, so it became quite easy. So just on the back of his connections, we were then able to collect up quite a lot of farmers. I'm not sure if it, in terms of relationships and getting through the door, it does help whenever you have the face-to-face, but I'm not quite sure if it makes that big of an impact in closing a deal. I think, you can do like DocuSign, or you can do tools now, and as long as you do your follow-up, you should still be able to close, I think. But perhaps in those early days of getting a foot in the door, then the personal helps. But we don't really yet have a really defined, because we're not scaling properly yet, a really defined sales process. But in terms of connections, et cetera, I think it's been fine online, but it would be better in person.
And again, on the ambassador piece, Daniel, I'm from a marketing background. I like Oroson because it's very creative. Having that ambassador really helps get the sale for Oroson, I would imagine.
It does, yeah. And having like ambassador customers makes a big difference, like recognizable names within the industry. That doesn't, and I would strongly advise, it doesn't mean you try and go for the biggest name possible from day one, because that'll just not work either. And you need to try to build kind of ambassadors at the different levels as you go through. So perhaps initially, whenever you start the business, you're only within Northern Ireland. Well, that's okay. Try and find an ambassador within Northern Ireland. Then you go into the UK. That's okay as well. Then try and find an ambassador in the UK and kind of take it at those levels, because then you have some kind of track record to back you up as you move through those levels. The other element as well, I suppose, is that I wouldn't be too quick to give an ambassador customer a discount or money off, etc., because often ambassador customers are the ones that can pay. And if your product is doing a good job and is delivering, often they will pay, and actually they will quite happily give you the testimonial and quite happily do everything beyond that. So if you can get them to do that without having to offer discount, etc., it just shows the level of engagement that they have, which is what you want ultimately, because what you don't want is an ambassador customer to give you a testimonial and then 2 months down the line, actually the usage nosedives and then they're no longer an ambassador customer. So it's a real balance there. We're going through a similar thing. We've an ambassador customer, Gravity Global, which is one of the largest marketing agencies in the UK, using Oroson, but they are writing us testimonials and stuff, but they're actually increasing not only the usage, but also moving through the subscription levels. So they've upgraded 3 times in the past 2 months. So they're continuously going through the levels, which is great, but I'm not offering them a discount because they're getting the value out the other end of the platform. And the reason why they're quite happy to give us the testimonial is coming back to that point. We've built a relationship with them. I have been able, because they're an ambassador customer, I've spent my time to build a relationship with the head point of contact within Gravity Global and use that founder story to kind of appeal to his better nature rather than having to kind of look at trying to find some commercial way to get him to do that.
I think a couple of key points for the startups to take away in terms of trying to find those champions, and back to what Philip mentioned in terms of budget, that's key. You need to be talking to the right buyer who's got the budget at the right time, and building those relations will get a feel for when's the right time and when the budget's going to be spent.
Just in terms of, I think, again, some of you have sort of referenced it or lightly touched upon it. Just something which I've seen come up quite a bit in the past while, just in terms of discussions, and that's around the merits of pursuing enterprise client versus the SMEs. So I think, Daniel made reference to it, Philip as well, and even Terry with regards, the larger dairy farmers in the US. But it's just what your opinions would have been on that, bear in mind the mixture of startup and scale-up companies that would be watching this, but then also how your views would have changed over the past year, if they changed at all. Maybe Terry, start with you.
I think, if your goal is to scale a business into something that's a venture capital interest and something that you can get a big interest of, you need to go for the big ticket customers. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can get big revenues from the big customers. I think to start with, however, you know, there has to be that groundwork on the smaller ones, making sure they're happy and working their way up. I mean, there's nothing worse than, and Daniel alluded to this earlier, getting a big sort of ambassador customer and then screwing up, or something goes wrong at the start. So you're better screwing up on the smaller guys and then moving towards the bigger ones. But definitely, and you can build a really good business with just pure SME customers, absolutely, and you can create good dividends and you can do fantastically well at it. But to do proper scale up venture capital type thing, you really need to be at large enterprise scale size of customers, and to be making sure that, because it is difficult dealing with them, they'll always push back on price, etc., etc. But I think to scale a business, you really need to go enterprise if that's your goal.
Philip, then what are your thoughts on that? You know, presumably it's something which you've encountered before or been through as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of our biggest challenges has always been that Northern Ireland is, you know, it's not a big country. We only have a limited number of funding options. We have a limited number of customers here. And so, you know, we always knew we were going to have to go wider. So, you know, we were always on planes and trains heading places and doing things. And now it's a lot easier and more efficient because we can talk to, you know, 2 or 3 funders in a day, which we wouldn't have been able to do or do easily previously. So I think there's opportunity like never before. I think as well that, you know, we've moved as well, thinking about, you know, pre-COVID and post-COVID to now, well, you know, there was a pre-COVID world. COVID has changed things and how we operate and how we, you know, do business. And I don't think it's going back to the old ways. I think it'll be a hybrid model. So, you know, I think it's given us more opportunity, if anything. I don't think there's ever been a better time to start or scale a business.
And then Daniel, you know, again, you'd said earlier about, you know, pursuing banks, and even in the earlier stage of what Oroson was as a company, you know, going after some of those big educators and universities, and presumably, you know, you look at that where there's users where they could be in the thousands, in terms of banks, depending on the scale of them, versus then, like you say, the smaller ones who might have 5 or 10 users. So just what would your thoughts be around the enterprise client pursuit versus SME?
Yeah, so it really depends upon your business, right? Okay, so on what type of product is you're selling. So I can only comment based upon kind of my own experience. Like, sometimes there's just no option to sell a SME or a SaaS version of a product. From my experience, enterprise, so enterprise promises a big payout, but it's an awful long sales cycle. Trying to get a decision maker to make a decision involves lots of committees, and at any point it can just fall off the ladder. So the example I would use at one point with Oroson, we actually had engagement from a number of the UK financial institutions, and including HSBC. So we kind of got all the way through to the point where I did a full pitch to the board of HSBC for the UK and Europe, and received very well. They loved it, and you can imagine I came back and was like, "Crack champagne open, we're away here. This is great." And then was a further 6 months of due diligence and going through process and technical audits and everything going through, to the point where it became what you ultimately want in any sales process is your internal champion. Okay, but with an enterprise sale, it's very difficult to establish that internal champion. And actually, as would happen with us, our internal champion was poached by Deloitte, so they disappeared off the scene. And if you lose your internal champion, you're dead. And the problem is that with an enterprise sales play, one of the bigger problems with it is not only is it a long sales cycle, you're also putting up your eggs in one basket all the time. So you're hoping, because if you have one large customer, that's great. If they fall off, you're back to zero. You're almost better if you want to get to £10,000 a month recurring revenue, 100 or 200 customers getting you to £10,000 a month recurring revenue rather than one customer getting you to that point gives your business a bit more stability, and you can be a bit more flexible. If one business stops using the platform, that's not a nightmare scenario. You're not dead in the water. Whereas an enterprise play, you're suddenly scrambling with big wage bills to pay and trying to work out what you do next. So it really depends upon the business. My experience has been that with a SaaS product, enterprise is something that should be considered much further down the line. Whenever not only you have product market fit, but you have really substantial monthly recurring revenues in excess of like £100,000 of monthly recurring revenue, and you're really driving beyond that, and £1 million in annual recurring revenue. It not only just because of the stability it gives the business and the ability to be flexible, but more so it means that you're getting feedback from a broader spectrum of people that are actually using your product. Okay, so you want to build, and that's also a big problem because we work with enterprise. So enterprise customers have an expectation. They're the big players in the room. So you're going to do what they say. That at least is their expectation. So the expectation is you're building a product for them. That shouldn't be your expectation with any customer. To build a successful business, you're building a product that appeals to a wide range of customers. So if you can get a wider range of customers using your product and paying you, well, that's great. Then you're showing that product market fit. You're showing you can scale to a larger number of businesses. As soon as you have one customer that is taking more of your time, that is demanding more of you, etc., it suddenly means that you're almost moving towards more of a bespoke product, which then becomes more difficult and actually takes up more of your time. My biggest learning throughout my time in the business, Oroson, is that the time is your most valuable commodity. Okay, so you can always raise more capital, you can always get more expertise. The time is just like always running out. Okay, and that could be time because you have limited funding, limited resources, Philip kind of mentioned. Equally, it could be time because there could be other competitors coming up behind you, and if you're not quickly, they could be better funded. They could be on the west coast of the States and have a few million behind them and they're flying. So you're always fighting against that time, and because of that, you have to make sure that you're really regimented with your process, and you're very when it comes to prioritizing what should take your attention and what should take the business's attention, you need to be really, really focused, because it just takes you to go down one wrong avenue and you could waste 6 months and an awful lot of capital, an awful lot of time, and that could be the end of the business.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we've two different types of customer. We've got the end consumer, and we've sold about 70,000 of those, and we've got the kind of city or engineering projects, which we're probably approaching 20 of those. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they both come with the challenges and the benefits. So those enterprise customers obviously put a lot of things on hold or pushed out decisions on things for a very long time with COVID, and that would have put us in a very, very difficult situation did we not have those smaller customers, those individual consumers, and they were the ones who really, we were very fortunate that during COVID, a lot of people dusted out the old bike at the back of the shed or went down to Halfords and bought what they could before they all ran out, and got back on the bikes. And so there was a demand for accessories as well for better lighting. And so we actually had, in terms of product, we'd record sales quarters at the end of, a couple of quarters at the end of last year there, which was incredible for us and allowed us to, bank enough cash to extend the runway and keep everything happy as those big corporate deals took longer to crystallize and to form. And yeah, I think the other thing, just to echo what Daniel says, I came from a background where I worked for a software house that did trading systems for banks, and it was always the toss-up of, Bank X is willing to pay a lot of money for a lot of deep customization of the product, but you're not going to be able to sell that to anyone else. And quite often that was rejected, and we said, look, we'd like to do that, but we're just not going to, because it doesn't roll into the overall product roadmap and where we're going, so that we can sell it not just to you, but to 20 or 30 banks. So keeping that, making sure that you're not just a yes man, for want of a better term, and pleasing that one customer, making sure that you've got a vision for the product which aligns with multiple customers, I think is also super important.
Yeah, I think that was, I remember from my Farm Wizard days, there was always the trap of the big client that wanted the changes done and was quite willing to pay what looked like a big pile of money to get a load of changes done, but it wasn't recurring. And there's always that sort of temptation to do those customizations and to get that little bit of extra cash flow coming in. But no, always best avoid, always stay focused on the product, which you can sell to everybody rather than becoming a bespoke developer for anybody. I think the other thing to add as well, when you consider the SMEs, I think, and it's maybe something that we take for granted now, but the web is such a fantastic distribution channel for these sorts of for selling to SMEs, because you can be in front of them, you can fulfill customer orders very, very quickly, completely automated. So it's not like you have to send a salesperson down and to everybody's knocking every SME's door. So I guess there's that side of it as well.
And it's really interesting, the balance of SMEs versus enterprise and the time and reward. And it's definitely something that the startups need to really think about having both, as you say. And looking forward, we've talked a lot about sales processes. If you could name one thing that you would like to keep going forward for your sales processes, and maybe one thing that you would like to ditch. Philip, what do you think you'll keep and what do you think you'll ditch going forward?
Oh, that's a good question. You put me on the spot there. He says, shuffling in his chair, thinking quickly. I think the thing I'd like to keep is definitely the ability to reach out to people via Zoom meetings. That's been just transformational for us in terms of the number of people we can reach very quickly, and the speed with which we can then be a lot more selective in terms of who we're going to chase and spend our time on, and who are perhaps not that useful. I think it's been really useful for us in exploring potential partnerships as well, and leveraging similar people in a similar space to us but with different products. So can we leverage their customers, or can we kind of get some revenue for allowing them to access ours? I think it's been really useful for us. In terms of the thing that I would ditch, that's a tricky one. We evolve as we go along. We make a huge amount of mistakes. We have a list of war stories that we tell people when they join, and almost here's all the mistakes we've made so you don't have to. So yeah, we're still a company that's willing to explore, to roll the dice, to try new things. So I think it's difficult to know what we throw out because we've already thrown it out.
Yeah, fair enough. Terry, do you have one thing you'd keep, or one thing you'd leave behind, or improve even maybe?
Yeah, well, as well as the very easy to reach lots and lots of customers via Zoom, I would say the online conferences. I'll definitely be spending money on online conferences. But I think what I will do, I could see myself doing more sort of like a road trip, maybe once a year, and maybe spending 2-3 weeks in the US and visit as many customers as possible. Just to make a real good use of a trip, and to do as much face-to-face as possible to existing customers that you've never met before, but you've created a relationship with. I think that could be really, really beneficial, but it'd be very sort of tightly bound and again, very efficient. I think that would be important, because it's kind of like, it's like you've spoken to people on Zoom and you've had great sessions, and the first thing he says, fantastic to meet you in the flesh, is what you'd say. So I think that could be very effective, I reckon, going forward in the future.
And Daniel, in terms of sales, anything you would keep and keep using, or anything you would leave or improve?
I'm the last person to get this question, and I don't have a particular good answer. So I would, like Philip, we kind of move very quickly. So we kind of, whenever there's something that's inefficient, they're not working for us, we kind of drop it quite quickly, or we find a better way to make it work. In terms of what I'd like to improve upon is probably a question I could probably answer better. And it's actually nothing to do with the sales process or anything like that, but it's something that I think has almost been left behind a wee bit. I think I'd like to find a way to get the team as a whole to spend more time away from the computer. Something that, and I know it's been in the headlines and stuff, but I think mental health has really suffered during COVID, like in a big way. My team, I know a lot of them start at 7 in the morning, say they finish at 6, have their dinner and go back on at 10, and they're just flat out and nobody takes a break, which is like, startup, you're kind of like, oh, that's great, that's what it should be. It's not. Like, it only works in a very short period of time, and it's only meant to work in a very short period of time. But during COVID, it's become the new norm. Everybody's used to it, and interconnectivity between Slack and everything means you're more connected than ever. So it means you feel, I can see other team members almost feeling an obligation, even on their days off, to come and do work because other people are working and everybody's connected together. And trying to find ways to encourage the team to take time away from the computer. I know some of our team have set up like running clubs through Strava and things. And the winter hasn't helped that either. And I know that, like, hopefully coming into the summer months, but actively trying to encourage team members to kind of get away from the desk, do some exercise, etc., and feel more refreshed, because I can just tell, and we're constantly trying to find ways. Like everybody ditched quizzes about 6 months ago, but trying to find ways on a monthly basis to try and help the team just stay fresh and have a bit of fun. And because it's just something that I think everybody suffered from during kind of COVID generally. And particularly depending upon the team members, you know, you have some team members that will not be as big a problem for. Generally salespeople who generally are never have much of a problem when it comes to socializing, even remotely. But then you have other more introverted members of the team as well, and this has been a real difficult time, I think, for them. I think it's really important to try and bring everybody along and look after your employees during this period. The benefits that companies kind of talked about pre-COVID are not really the same anymore. You know, having a nice office was, you know, food available or anything, none of that matters anymore. Nobody's in an office, nobody gets any of those benefits. So you need to try and find other ways to kind of bring some kind of just something a bit more fun to the team as well, because it can be a long old slog otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the efficiency of working online is great. It saves a lot of time, but you're right, you know, it can be tiring and hard work and stress levels can go up. So it's a very valid point that everybody needs to take a bit of time out away from the screen.
Yeah, I mean, it's even back to the health and well-being side of things as well. You know, before, for years, it's been a topic and there's been those benefits that have been offered by companies. But I think really this past year it's had to be put into practice. And it is a harder way to monitor is through video calls or phone calls with people, checking in, seeing how they are. But really, again, you can't read as much about the body language through video calls, and you're just relying on people telling you, which obviously doesn't tend to happen. But I think it is, it's, you know, once people want to get back, and we're social creatures, that's what humans are. So everybody wants to get back, albeit if it's still at an arm's length away. And on that, I should probably just point out that I'm not sitting at the other end of Daniel's wall. It might look like here, but we are separate buildings. But lastly, from my side, there's going to be one question, but just a reminder to the audience then, if there's any more questions, just if anybody from the audience wants to put them in, we've got one sitting there, but if there's any others, just now would be the time to put them in. So yes, lastly, from my side, I wondered, as you see it, what are the main challenges that are facing tech startups or tech businesses in general at the moment, you know, whether that's sales or just in the wider context of the business? And what advice would you have for these companies or for the people dealing with these challenges? I'll go with Terry first on that, I think.
I think your first step is to be really, really clear of your value proposition. I remember somebody said to me one time about setting up a business, you know, you want to be in a position where somebody hands you £5 and you can give them back 10. And that's really what you want to be able to do, to be very clear on quantifying it, making sure that you have something niche and different. I think is very, very important as well. But I think now is a great time to be in a tech company. I think it's, yeah, as we discussed before, digitization, COVID's accelerated it, and I think there's great opportunities. But yeah, the one thing is just be very, very clear of your value proposition and make sure you can articulate that well.
And Philip, then what about yourself? What would you say, and what would your advice be, given all the sort of the experience that you've been through with See.Sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for us has always been about where to spend our time most efficiently. So, you know, back to what Daniel was saying earlier around, you know, you're always against it. I think there's always the temptation to do the easy stuff, to get stuff done, to tick them off, to feel that you've done something. And it's not always necessarily what's going to move your business forward. Sometimes it's about tackling the big challenges. And it could be anything from, you know, it could be good things. It could be, you know, going out and finding new sales opportunities, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and getting that stuff done. It can be dealing with skeletons in the closet in the business. We all accumulate them as we go along, and sometimes they have to be dealt with. And always, you know, earlier is better than later. If you've got an issue, figure it out and sort it. And it can be internal or external. It's not necessarily something you've done wrong. It could be a challenge with a competitor or other things as well. So really just being, you know, super efficient with your time and figuring out, you know, what does it mean if I do this task? You know, how much more revenue does it bring? How does it take my business forward? And judge it based on that.
And Daniel, then just obviously lastly from your perspective and still going through those stages, what do you see being those challenges? And I'm sure you probably within your network as well hear plenty about them.
Yeah, it depends really on the type of business. I mean, for a SaaS platform, I think one of the biggest challenges, particularly for new startups over the course of the next while, is going to be integration with other tools in the tech stack. So there is definitely an acceleration, obviously, of adoption of new technology, and has been over the course of the past 6 months. That's going to continue. But what you're going to notice, I think, is a trend over the course of the next 12 months, and anybody who's having sales calls will be businesses you're trying to sell to will say, oh, we already have a stack of, you know, this many tools, and we're going to get overloaded with tools and we're not careful and all this type of stuff. Like, I can already see that starting to become a trend. So thinking carefully, not just about what your value proposition is, but how does your value proposition sit alongside whatever other tech tools are within their stack, or whatever else they're using, and how does it enhance the value, or how does that enhance the value of your product, is incredibly important. Because if you think about it, if you're coming in and they already have a really established project management platform, for example, and that they're paying an awful lot of money for, they're not going to buck that out the window unless your tool has some form of real tight integration with it. And that's quite difficult, because integrations, it can be built, you know, any which way from Sunday. It really depends upon the specific use case. So it's a black hole of resource as well if you're not careful. So it's really important you understand the use case behind the integration. And for a tech startup, whenever you have limited time and resource, you don't want to get into you don't want to get into building lots of integrations. That's why if you look at the Slacks, the Monday.coms of this world, etc., you know, they're multi-million, nothing billion-dollar companies at this stage. But they have teams of 200 people building integrations, as many as they can, as often as they can, because they see that as core value. So one of the things we're exploring is trying to identify what other tools do your ideal customer use within their tech stacks. Maybe they use Slack every day. That's the way they communicate. Brilliant. Well, then how can your tool introduce a simple integration Slack, even just for notifications, so it then ties in with their tech stack, which then just suddenly makes your product more sticky and easier to engage with. So it's kind of a key thing, I think, will become a trend over the course of the next while. And you'll see, no doubt, from the tools that everybody will be familiar with, like Slack, like Monday, like Asana, Teams. All those tools are introducing their own marketplaces, as they call them, where they have, you know, all those different plugins and tools, and they're growing exponentially. So actually getting the right placement within those marketplaces, it's something that I think a lot of businesses should really take a focus on over the course of the next kind of 12 months.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat, was it for last year? There was over 7,000 new SaaS products launched. And I don't know if that was the UK or if it was globally, but you know, it is very important to be stand out from the crowd, but also to be able to integrate and partner up with, you know, downflow or upflow in terms of your customers and suppliers, and provide, you know, one-stop shop if you can. And during the conversation, we were having a chat about the sales hires earlier on, and George came in there to just say, you know, if you're bringing on your sales hire, you know, how long roughly would it take for them to learn and be effective? Now, you know, that's how long's a piece of string, but, you know, how long does it get them to get their feet under the table, I guess? Philip, do you want to give it a go? It's not an easy question.
Yeah.
I can answer that, because I've been through that a couple of times, and I'm going through it again at the moment, actually. And it depends, once again, really depends on the business and how technical your product is and your business is, and how much of understanding. However, as a good salesman once told me, a salesperson shouldn't be selling, unless it's an incredibly technical product, they shouldn't really be selling the technical side of the product. They should be selling the sizzle. That's what the person's initially interested in buying. You know, what's the value that they're going to add? A good salesperson should almost within their first week be able to sell you the sizzle. They might not be able to sell it, ready to sell it to the customer yet, but they should be able to do almost a demo pitch to you, and you'd be like, yeah, okay, I would buy from you. Because if you're the founder, well, you have so many different jobs going on that the sales side of your job is, yeah, an important part of it, but it's only one part of it. The salesperson you're taking on should be so much better than you that within a week they should be able to just surpass anything that you could do. Within the first month, I would expect them to get up to speed and be ready, comfortable enough with the product, etc., to be able to do demos with customers, or to do proper sales with customers. We've just gone through at the moment, and I brought on a guy, and he's completely ripped to shreds the script, etc., we were using before in terms of those sales process, and actually become much harder. And he's at a position now where I would have expected him to be at a month where he's like, right, okay, let me loose, let me just go and do this, and actually don't micromanage me, leave me alone, let me go and do these sales, because he should be the expert, he should be leading the sales process. You should give him the knowledge that you've learned. But actually a good salesperson, like especially across SaaS, you'll see that salespeople often move between SaaS companies quite often, kind of jump between them. That's because their skills are can be ported across those different companies. So you should get very, very early in the process. You should be really able to understand, is a salesperson up to the measure or not? At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, what I've seen is that, you know, the good salesperson will come in and say, you know, where's your pitch deck? Where's your proposal that I can kind of tailor and tweak to the client? So you've got to have a lot of assets ready, a lot of backup for them so that they can really hit the ground running and go and do stuff. And it's always, I find it's always a bit of a challenge because sales cycles can be really slow in enterprise. And so, you know, you bring in this heavy hitter, they're costing you a lot, and they're going to take, you know, it could be a year or 18 months before you start to see the sales impact of those people. So it can often be very difficult to measure in the short term. So, you know, I would say make sure you've got a process such that you can see what they're doing. You know, you've got your pipe drive or your other sales pipeline figured out so that you can see, you know, how many are being added in, how many are progressing down. Make sure that they're being realistic, because obviously until it sells, you know, there's an element of perception in there about how likely it is to close, what the value of it is, and that sort of thing. So, you know, the more you can measure, the better. And I guess at the end of the day, be prepared to have it take a long time to get right. And as anyone will tell you, finding good salespeople, when you find good ones, it's incredible. And when you find bad ones, it's disastrous. And, you know, they are a big cost and they do take time to figure out. So they are, you know, a big roll of the dice. So, you know, think carefully, get references and get them to pitch and sell something to you before you sign them up.
And Terry, have you any more to add in terms of?
I would say it's definitely a fact directly related to your sales cycle length. You know, what would you expect? I think even in a long sales cycle, if you got to 6 months and you weren't seeing the pipeline start to develop through and to get a really good feeling that that even maybe if the sales cycle was taking longer, that you weren't getting across and moving through that through the pipeline, I think you probably want to cut your losses then. I think one of the other things to think about is your recruitment agencies will have a refund period, which is always worth negotiating so that you can get rid of them, potentially get a refund, and you know, if you're going through recruitment agencies quite quickly.
There's another question that's come in, and maybe Terry, it might be most pertinent to yourself. First answer anyway, and the others, Philip, Daniel, feel free to chip in afterwards. So there's a tendency here in NI to start, grow to a certain size and sell. Is that a good mindset, or should we be growing much bigger and longer term?
Yeah, it depends whether you want to take a selfish view or an NI PLC view. I think from a selfish view perspective, whenever I saw a site of an acquisition, I grabbed it because I had a goal to build and sell a business. This time around, though, I want to build something much more impactful, and I've taken steps to do that, choosing technologies, choosing the team, etc. So I've sort of learned all my lessons from before. I was really happy with the experience and the result. But this time I want to do something really, really big. And you do think to yourself, in NI PLC terms, you know, you want to do something. I think we all, in our lives, we want to be impactful, and we want to leave an impression on the earth whenever we leave. So I think it would be nice to build something bigger. But I think, yes, I think the mindset is that we sell earlier, and I think our venture capital guys, if they see like a 15-20 million exit, they see that as a good result. And I think maybe it'll take time. We need a few more bigger exits, and I think we're growing. The past 10 years, I think the VC landscape has changed so much, and the startup has developed so much in Northern Ireland, and it's growing. So I think we need to see maybe a unicorn exit, or certainly a unicorn size of a company beyond, but fantastic companies like Andor and Kainos have done. I think we need to see a few more of those and a few very large scale exits, and then that'll change the mindset. People see more examples. There'll be former founders then able to put more money in. So I think it's coming. I think it's coming through time. But I think right now there is that little bit of a mindset to sell early.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's the mindset element is huge, and not just what I find is kind of it's built into almost a majority of people within the ecosystem within Northern Ireland, whether it be from investment cycle, even from Invest NI. I've had conversations with Invest NI where they haven't understood the concept of an aggressively growing SaaS business. They don't understand that it takes that level of capital, and it's any of the businesses, the SaaS, and speaking specifically regarding SaaS now, so SaaS as a business model is built around it being capital intensive in the early days, and then growing and then getting to an aggressive growth curve. So by its very nature, it requires an awful lot of capital from the very outset. So the initial, and that's why so many of them kind of start on the west coast or east coast of the States. And in the it's very counterintuitive in some respects, because you will hear in a lot of marketing and a lot of stuff comes from Best and others, ideas of creating these unicorn businesses coming from Northern Ireland, which is a great aspiration, but actually it's very difficult to create those without the capital and experience, etc., to come behind those and to build those types of businesses. And that's why there's so many that have to go across the water and kind of raise funds elsewhere, which is not a bad thing, but actually it's more around having the expertise to be able to advise companies to do that, and to have the support networks in place to help build companies that can go across and be really appealing to those kind of larger funders. Because it is, if you're 100% right, Terry, that idea of at the stage where we do start to create a few more unicorns and that expertise can come back into the system, etc., that's the point where things can really start to take off. But it's at the moment, it almost requires a complete mind shift, because it's so difficult within the Northern Ireland ecosystem to build momentum, and you really have to really look beyond that if that's the type of business model you're going towards.
I'm going to take a slightly contrarian view, just to bring a bit of a different view to the mix. So I think we actually need more smaller exits. I think that, love what Andor and Kainos and First Derivatives and that sort of thing have all done. Incredible success stories, and we need more of those guys. But I think to get more of those guys, I think what we really need is more of those small exits. So, if I, like Terry, yourself, when you come to put together another round, there's nothing more powerful than saying, I've successfully exited 1, 2, 3 businesses before. So, back me again, and people will buy into that a lot more easily. I think one of the challenges we have is that we've got an amazing funding structure in Northern Ireland with, Invest and I support and the various funds to allow us to grow to a certain size, probably about $1 million in revenue or thereabouts. And then that kind of scale up capital beyond that, that's where we have to go further afield. And it's difficult because we're up against then the people in the other markets in London and further afield who have exited several times and who do have the credibility and have got the experience from running different companies and recycling that talent into the next generation of companies that we haven't yet seen in Northern Ireland. I think, partly we've got a culture of, if something's not quite right, we'll put up with it and deal with it and allow it to exist for a very long time. And I think there's almost a tendency to create zombie companies that, they're not bad companies. They're perfectly feasible lifestyle businesses, but they're almost presenting themselves as trying to be these growth companies that they'll never achieve. And I think it's a real shame, because I think those companies should, if it was somewhere like Silicon Valley, I think a lot of times the company founders would look at it and say, okay, we've tried this, it's never going to be, 100 million in sales, therefore we're just going to kill it, and we're going to recycle our people and our talent and our time into other things. I think if we did that more in Northern Ireland, I think we'd help accelerate that ecosystem that we've got to get more exits, to get more good companies, and to build more of those unicorn companies that we so desire and want to see, which will then in turn attract those bigger funders to come and look at us more, to fund those companies to grow and continue on that success. And our businesses, our people are as good as anywhere in the world. We're world class, and I think we have the ability to do that. But I think we need to change a little bit culturally so we can accelerate that.
Well, it's always good to end on a bit of controversy, and it's certainly not the worst controversy this week, so we'll take that as a positive. Look, we're more or less out of time, so I just want to say, thank you very much to everybody for attending. The session has been recorded, so we will be making it available in due course. So if you would like to see that, please just contact us. But for now, yes, I'd like to say a big thank you to Jenny and Raise Ventures again, to Philip, Terry, and Daniel. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights, your expertise. It's been no doubt incredibly valuable to everybody on the call, and we wish you continued success. And then really, lastly, just a big thank you to everyone who's joined us and for taking part and contributing. So hopefully next time we'll see you in person, but for now, take care and bye-bye.